talk,
identity,
and access
management.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. You still asymptomatic?
So far, so good. COVID-free.
So you're saying that because you were tested and the test came back negative?
No, I have no idea. Haven't been tested. I think that's been an issue for maybe some folks, but symptom-wise, I feel fine. I guess that doesn't mean I'm COVID-free at this point, but
that's right.
Let's just say I feel fine.
All I can say is that if I got it, it must just be traveling through the air because I've gone nowhere.
Right.
I feel like I've been a prisoner within these four walls, but hey, it beats the alternative.
Right, exactly. Yeah, tomorrow will be the 2-week anniversary of me driving a car, so I think that'll be cause for me to get out and celebrate.
That's
and
why
go for another ride.
That's why you have a Tesla. Because even if you forget to drive, it can drive you there.
Yeah, it's getting close to that. That's for sure. Highly recommended. But enough about that. So I know we had a few things that you're kind of thinking about this week, but what do you want to talk about for this episode?
So I wanted to talk about from an IAM program manager perspective, or somebody who's trying to get an IAM program funded and get some steam behind it within the organization, putting together an ROI or return on investment analysis and kind of the approach. And I want to come from the perspective of, you and I have done this a lot of times throughout our career, and we now counsel our clients on how to do it. So I want to base it primarily on experience and what we've learned over the years, but we also ran into a file or a PDF, a kind of a white paper on ROI that was done by Forrester Research for Auth0 for their product. And it just triggered a lot of ideas. It's a really well done paper, and perhaps we can find a link and put it in the show notes. But it just triggered a lot of ideas, and a lot of them aligned with my experience, but there were also some differences. So I figured that would be a good topic for us.
Yeah, I like that. And I think the first thing, me being a cynic that I sometimes am, is, whenever you see a paper that's been commissioned by somebody, right? Usually it's a vendor. They're commissioning someone to come up with some kind of report that should show the person, the company or the entity in a positive light. So I think even with that, I thought the report was still valuable because a lot of the different things that they talk about from a measurement standpoint, right? How do you measure the return on the investment? I think apply across not just a specific technology, but can be extrapolated out to other things. And in this case, it's Auth0, right? And they commissioned Forrester to run a report. And this is something that's very common in the industry. Is a vendor will reach out and say, "Hey, we're looking for this report to kind of promote our product or tool or service, whatever it is." So you kind of have to take a little bit of a grain of salt, but I think in this case, there are, like I said, things that we can kind of pull out that make sense and try to make it as, vendor neutral or vendor agnostic or bipartisan or however we want to put it, right? To make it useful for people today. And I will put a link to the report in the show notes. So wherever you get your podcast from, take a look in the notes there, and you should.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Especially in our roles as vendor agnostic consultants, we're constantly reading vendor specific documentation and white papers and things like that. And you get a combination of two things. The first thing is you can get some, good holistic ideas that can be used irregardless of the vendor. But then also the motivation for a vendor to commission this type of paper is obvious, right? They want to get their name out there in a positive light. So nobody expects the white paper to come out and say, "Hey, there's negative return on investment from this product," right? That would be outrageous, outlandish.
But I would commend them for their truth in advertising. How about that?
Yeah, good. But they'd be a great memory because they wouldn't last too long with those business
right,
practices.
Exactly.
But yeah, so let's dive into kind of what some of the things that came back were. And the first thing I had in my notes was around, um, what types of benefits can you get from deploying an IAM? At the highest level, I think there are tangible benefits and intangible benefits. In other words, something that you can quantify in terms of dollars versus things that you don't, either you aren't worth putting the effort into dollarizing, uh, or you can't dollarize something like satisfaction, especially if people in your employ. Now, you could, I think the heart of a lot of ROI investments are taking things that are softer and kind of intangible and trying to dollarize them. The further you go in terms of trying to do that where people aren't going to feel it, I think the more you're going to wash down your story. If you say, we're going to have $25 million of benefit, and you've got every 100 different benefits, and you're taking satisfaction of our developers and saying we're going to have you know 10% less turnover, and we spend $25,000 to acquire each new developer, so we're going to save $50,000 a year right there. Okay, I think you're going to get a lot of eyes rolling in the room. So when you come to your tangible benefits, I think you want to try and keep them as real as possible, and you want to focus on the major areas where people are going to kind of agree with your analysis. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is one of the first mistakes that a lot of people make when they're trying to do a return on investment, is to try to measure everything and make it a strict dollars and cents case. The intangible benefits are a huge part of a lot of these different technologies, right? There are certain calculations you can perform around cost, risk, if your organization has developed a risk cost matrix, those sorts of things. But how do you measure something that is the right thing to do, that is makes jobs easier to do, right? Can you do it in, it shaved off a couple minutes here, and based on average salary, it's kind of like this or that, right? um, I I think it's one of the things that you have to consider when you're trying to develop a return on investment, is to understand that there will be this nebula or void where you may not have an exact number on it. And it may be more along the lines of, hey, our customer satisfaction, as we pulled it, 2 years ago, was people hated it. That was the general consensus. Now, with the investments we've made in people, process, technology, the overall sentiment is higher. Is that a number? Maybe, or maybe it's a smiley face versus a frowny face, right? Or some other emoji type approach. So I think, trying to have the right balance between quantified and unquantified benefits makes a lot of sense. And obviously numbers are good. Numbers sometimes are difficult to argue against, but the more numbers you can have, the better, but should not be the end all be all when it comes to an ROI.
I agree with that. I remember with one of my early IT projects, even before I got into IAM, I was trying to put together an ROI analysis, and someone said to me, okay, enough of all the soft benefits, efficiency. How many people can I fire? And it's like I always remember that, because it was like trying to be like this old school, hard nosed management style. And to me, that was ridiculous. To me, information technology has always been about making the organization more efficient, and making people more efficient in their job. You can quantify that in terms of dollars, but just think about the early days of PCs or mainframes, and how inefficient the experience was compared to today. I'm talking on a MacBook and a Zoom meeting. We can share video. Think about how much more efficient we can be today given the technology. And that's been a slow grind over time, but it's people investing in technology and buying the next version, and these incremental improvements have made us more efficient over time. And so I don't want to ignore the efficiency, and my perspective, and it might be unique to me, or it might not be the predominant one. And I think you have to know your organization, you have to know your audience. But to me, driving efficiency is a real benefit, whether you want to quantify it or you want it to leave it unquantifiable and say it's kind of an intangible. But I think that's important. Uh, Having said all that, hard savings are king. If you can say, today we've got this legacy and we are now out of support, and everybody agrees we have to continue support, right? We can't run this system, and if it breaks, we're out of business. And we're paying $1 million a year for this new support contract, and this new system, which is going to be 10 times better, it's only going to be $500,000 a year. That everybody should be sold on that one, right? I mean, that's an easy one. But usually these ROI calculations are not slam dunks like that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is you have to make sure you can deliver if you're going to have that hard saving number, right? What happens if after 2 years or whatever timeline you projected, you don't hit that number? Is the project a failure?
Right. That's right. And I think I think as information technology professional, we have to get good at talking about risk. And, there's risk to projects, there's risk to initiatives, and being very clear about here's what you need to be successful. Um, it's hard sometimes when you feel like your ROI is, you just might barely get it approved, or they just might to then throw on top of it, hey, and this whole thing might blow up if we don't get participation from the business units, if we don't get support from an executive perspective. And it's like, okay, well, maybe this is just better just not to do this. So, but you know what? I also think you can't get yourself so emotionally involved with it that you're willing to ignore those things or not bring those things up, just to get it approved. You do so at your own peril. Potentially this whole project fails and it's egg on your face anyway. So in that case, to me, you'd be better off not having it approved in the first place. It's important to just be upfront.
Yeah, you got to be prepared to deliver. What are some examples of a quantified benefit that could come out of doing something related to identity and access?
So the white paper we talked about follows a model called the TEI, which is the um, Total Economic Impact Framework. And they talk about 4 different types of quantifiable benefits: cost, benefit, flexibility, and risk. Now, I'm a little more old school, and from my business class days, we always looked at cost, benefit, and risk. And I think flexibility would be in benefit. And I'll even take benefit to even be more of a stickler and talk about increased revenue. Because ultimately what it comes back to, if you're making a business decision, is you want to increase profitability, but there's also that factor of risk. And risk could seem like an intangible, but we have to figure out a way to make it tangible, to quantify the value of risk. So start with cost, because I think this has been the traditional approach to justifying return on investment for IAM for the past, at least 10, 15 years ago. This was like the only thing that vendors talked about. How much do you guys spend on password resets? And it was like, you can reduce the cost of password resets by 80%. So if you spend $20 on a per password reset and you do 100,000 of them, now you're only going to do 20,000 of them. So you can do the math and you can figure out what amount of money you're going to spend after you deduct the cost of what you're going to spend to implement their system. So it was such a cost focus, but I still think, cost avoidance is a major component of an ROI when it comes to an IAM system. So first thing that comes to mind is automation. Automation is a big driver, taking manual processes. And this gets back to the efficiency piece, but automating manual processes is a way to reduce cost. And, I think a lot of people don't like the analysis where you say you can reduce 50% of a person's workload, and they say, well, who can I fire? And again, that's not the That's not the role of IT. Isn't just eliminating people. It's making people more efficient so they can either work on other things or the organization can run leaner.
Yeah,
Thoughts on
I
that?
think, yeah, I mean, the whole, we can reduce headcount by X if we do this thing, really doesn't pan out very often in my experience. I think that's maybe how people used to look at it. What it's turned out now into is, what other work could we be doing if we had free time? Having, managed IAM teams in the past, one of the biggest challenges that I saw from an automation standpoint was more shifting the mindset of people away from I'm an administrator to I'm an analyst, right? It was a higher thought level process. We were taking things that were more able to be automated and shifting, the people to things that were not as easy to automate, or required, more thought than we were willing to invest from a technology standpoint. So in my mind, it's not really a a headcount savings equation a lot of times, especially for kind of enterprises that are in the middle of trying to modernize and make their IM programs, more capable or more mature. It's more of how, like I said, how we make them more efficient, how we move them onto more value added tasks where a human would be better doing it than just resetting another password, right? Or just creating another Active Directory account, or in my old days, creating another Lotus Notes ID file, right? Those sorts of things. So, I think it's important to consider that. And, touching real quickly on your password reset example, right? I think that's something that I fell victim to a long time ago was, oh yeah, we're doing X number of password resets per year. If we had a tool and we could automate it, we would only have to do, this percentage of it. And that's how we'll save money on it. Now, the mistake that I made was assuming that it was a perfect world. Everyone was going to register. Everyone was going to use the password reset tool, right? Things like that. So just be careful when you're creating those types of calculations that you have to assume that not everyone's going to follow the process or not follow it as quickly as you want them to. And make sure that you've got numbers that are actually real world achievable and not theoretically perfect type scenarios.
Right, right. So I've got a couple others in the cost area, but here's your web gem for this podcast. It's
Oh, there's
that
the baseball analogy. I like it.
yeah, I had to pull one out, right? So here's
There's
your
no
web
baseball, so we had to get a web gem in somehow.
play of the week. Um, so make a list. Just start brainstorming because there are different types of IAM projects. We're not in one podcast going to come up with every possible cost saving you could achieve through IAM. If you're deploying PAM, you're deploying single sign-on for your workforce or customers or identity governance, they all have different areas where you can save money. And then layer on top of it your specifics of your organization, what software you may be running today that you can get rid of, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to list a couple just to give you some ideas, but I think it's your job to kind of brainstorm through some of those. So one, and this one came out of the white paper, was removing identity from applications, especially custom applications, can reduce the cost to manage them. So, this was an idea I actually used in my first IAM project was, like 25% of one of our applications, the development of that application was dedicated to managing identity and access and roles and things like that. And we thought, okay, if we could shift 50% of that out of that application, that would free up, 10 to 15% of the development time for that application to be repurposed towards business functionality. And how do you calculate that? Well, based on the cost what it costs the organization to run that development team, take 15% of that. I mean, that's how you you come up with that calculation. And from my perspective, if I had to justify a number like that, it would be like, that's how we, here's the mechanics of how we calculated it. We weren't going to spend years trying to figure out how to calculate like that number, but that is a number that makes sense. The second thing I came up with on my own was just thinking of the standard onboarding process. Think of how much productivity time can be lost when someone shows up, they don't have their account, they don't have their password, they don't have access to all the applications. by just deploying like an identity governance system, onboarding people before they start, using roles to automate access assignment, um, it can be a huge productivity booster, not wasting 2 or 3 days of time for people to go and request access. And okay, if you have 200 employees, that's not going to add up to a lot. But if you have 50,000 employees, that's a huge savings.
Yeah, I think it's something to consider, strongly when you're putting together these calculations. Was there another quantified benefit that you can think of? Because I was thinking some of these quantified benefits have kind of associated unquantified benefits, right? You talked about the removing the identity out of the application. That also affects the user from a single sign-on experience potentially, right? Makes it easier for them. But are there other things that could be quantified in your mind?
I think that's the process. Come up with that list and then try to look for approaches that are creative but not outlandish to dollarize those
Mm-hmm.
benefits. And like we said earlier, pick kind of the top 4 or 5. Don't try to quantify every single benefit, especially if you have 20, 30, 40 or more benefits. Don't try to quantify everything. It's going to just look ridiculous.
Yeah, get a little bit of analysis paralysis, right?
Well, you can also come up with, hey, the return on investment of this IAM system is more than we made last year. Okay, that's so we're going to make $20 billion from implementing IAM. Sounds like we should do it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I mean, you got to have these numbers based in the real world. They got to make sense, but don't go crazy with it. What are some unquantified or intangible benefits? I talked about, the one kind of associated with the reduction kind of identity within an application where, make it easier for people to sign on, reduce the number of logins, tends to lead to higher satisfaction, lower password reset type, issues. What are some other things like that?
Well, one I got from the white paper that I thought was good was, you know, increased developer satisfaction. Might sound like, depending on the organization you're in, that might sound like a joke. Yet you and I worked with a client last year that was mostly developers, right? Their products were applications on the web, and they give their developers free food all day. Somebody said that that's worth doing, right? This is going to retain people. I think it's a similar argument with, you know, the tools you use. If you had to come to work and use insufficient tools all the time, you might not be happy working there, and you might leave.
Yeah, in my mind is what business do you want to be in, right? Do you want to be in the business of developing IAM tools, or do you want to be in the business of developing a product and using commoditized IAM tools that are out there, right? Or standards based or something along those lines. A lot of organizations, they build something on their own because they either don't want to spend the money to buy a commercial product, or they think that they can't fit their business around it for some. But you really have to think about what is the business that you're in. If you're a manufacturing shop, is IAM supposed to be one of the key applications that your organization wants to focus on, or is it more along the lines of customers, making the manufacturing process itself more efficient, right? Supplies, supply chain, those sorts of things. So I think you really need to think about, where do you spend your IT dollars, and if you're not an IAM shop, why would you spend more money on that when you could redivert those into things that are more core to the business?
Right. Yeah, I think 98% of the companies out there don't need to be building their own IAM tools. Uh, Unless you're Microsoft or Google, you're not creating your own operating system, right? There's at
Right.
some point where you're buying technology, and that's good enough. And I think when it comes to identity management, even if you are a technology company, still probably doesn't make sense to build your own access management. Um, there are a couple of other things I wanted to bring up, Jeff, on the quantifiable side. So again, we talked about cost reduction. The other is increased revenue, and this is especially valuable when you're talking about customer IM or digital transformation. What I think here is that, you know, this is something that most businesses will be willing to invest in, improving life for their customer. Now, how do you take that and quantify it where, the IM portion of a digital transformation or IM portion of a new application is just a component of it, right? By implementing IM, you can't take credit for, you know, $3 billion of business that's going to go through this new portal, but you can take some credit. And in my experience, the way you go about quantifying how much credit you would take is working with the business unit or working with the business leader who's kind of responsible for rolling out that new system. So let's say your company wants to roll out a new portal, and that portal is going to be $1 billion a year of new revenue. At least that's kind of how it's been sold. Now, everybody knows we need to manage identities for it and kind of come up with a strategy. We need access management, user lifecycle management, logging, et cetera. And come up with a plan for it. And now you have to justify spending the money to get the IM tool. Work with the business leader for that portal and say, how much credit can we take for this particular part of it? Or can we bundle, or another approach is, can we bundle the IM investment with the total portal investment? And usually the money gets parceled out in pieces, as you need to spend it. So I think taking credit for part of that $1 billion is the right approach. That's what I've done in the past. But you can't just, as an IT person, go out and say, this is going to mean $100 million to the company. You have to be able to go in there with the leader who says, I need this for my portal, and it's 10% of our ability to succeed is right here, and that is $100 million or whatever. That should get people's attention.
Yeah, having that collaboration with the business is really important. Several projects I've worked on in the past have piggybacked IM, projects on top of or part of, other types of like digital transformation or, other projects that would take advantage of those services, right? Whether it's enhancing an existing service to take on additional demand or creating a new service because it doesn't exist in the environment today. I think that's wise words is always, work with the business, try to enlist their support, because if they see you as integral, and I say you meaning, the IAM as integral to their success, they're also going to help you obtain, the appropriate levels of support throughout the organization. If you're able to piggyback on top of another strategic initiative as well.
That's right. And by the way, it's a great career move. You want to get some recognition. You want to rub elbows with the people within your company who get things done. It's, work across organizational boundaries, get involved with initiatives that are strategic to the business and to the future of the business. So a couple other things there in the, increasing revenue, acquisitions and divestitures, if you can enable those, a lot of times that's on the internal IM side, being able to say, hey, we know we're adding new hospitals or we're adding new stores all the time, and we can plug them in a lot faster if we have these IM capabilities. That speaks to the business in terms of our ability to grow, or even divest. We can chunk off a business easier if that's kind of the mode that your organization is in. And then the other, which I gleaned from that white paper, was the ability to have more agility. So I think, the companies that are really succeeding today are the ones that are more agile and can get things done quicker. So if you have an IM system that, again, kind of allows people to go out and develop technology and not have to worry about the identity layer, you enable them to be more agile. And if the company can deliver new features or new products because of that in a faster way, it's a quicker recognition of the investment that they're making, quicker turnaround in terms of bringing in dollars into the organization. Those are real tangible types of ROI elements.
Yeah, I think if you can create that you can create that easy button, right, for developers and for the business to kind of plug into. I know you and I are big fans of trying to use standards based and not, having to customize everything all over the place. I like to call them hitch points. Create a few hitch points that developers and the business can plug their services into that gives them that easy button to IAM, which is, onboarding, offboarding, password management, entitlement management, privilege management, you reducing risk, allowing compliance and audit and all that stuff just makes it a lot easier and, adds a lot of value.
Yeah, that and what you just mentioned there is like kind of that third element, which I believe is quantifiable, and this is something that we as practitioners of information security need to get good at when doing ROI. They're decreasing risk, and it's not only that hey, someone could hack into our system and transfer out a couple $1 million. That's that's obvious, but also reputation risk. I mean, brands can be destroyed or seriously impacted overnight with some of the data breaches that occur. Lawsuits and regulators coming after the organization with fines. I mean, we see it with major corporations around the world being hit by, especially in the area of privacy, fines coming from regulators. So I think understanding those, and the way I like to quantify risk is, and I've talked about it before in the podcast, is impact versus times probability. So if something is a $1 million impact, in other words, if this event occurred, it would be $1 million impact, and the probability of it occurring is 10%, then it's $100,000 risk. That is kind of, and whether or not that clicks for you, that's the industry standard for how you calculate the cost of a risk or what it's worth. So the other one I want to bring up right now is business continuity. Look at how many businesses failed to prepare for an event like is taking place within the world right now. And I think that, take advantage of it. So this might be an intangible or tangible, but it's headline news right now, and it will be on people's mind for a long time to come. I mean, you don't suffer through an event like this without it leaving a mark. I think being able to say, especially if you can tie your IAM initiative to improving business continuity, I think take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Can't imagine how many companies right now, right, are kind of sitting and hadn't planned for this, or if they have planned for it, didn't get to the level where they needed to be able to pull it off or execute. Interesting to see how over the next year or so, and I'll be interested to see how this affects us, from the work that we do, is how are businesses going to react to this, right? Do they see it more as a blip, or will they start taking things like this more seriously and actually devoting, time, resources, et cetera, to be able to address the potentiality? Because I think a lot of companies, they tend to be more reactive. Unfortunately, sometimes bad things have to happen before, they're willing to make an investment in something, whether that's a breach or pandemic or, internet outage or, whatever it may be. Sometimes this is the type of thing that sparks the investment to get them where they probably should have been 6 months ago, 2 years ago, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes to us from an advisory perspective. What our current and future customers kind of pull from that.
Right. Jeff, the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of ROI, and we're running out of time, is around the different types of ROI analysis. And what I'd say is, you want to take the easiest model that is going to work for you. Some organizations will have a process by which they analyze the entire, let's just say, IT portfolio, and projects will compete for dollars, and the projects with the best ROI are the ones that are going to get the dollars, and after a certain point, projects are going to be deferred, and that's when you need to really be able on your A game. Other times ROI is just a slide in a deck because everybody knows this project's going to get approved, and we just need to show that there's some justification for it. So the three types in my mind are break-even analysis. And this is usually used for the smallest of projects. So you're going to spend $100,000, and you just need to show that, hey, within a year or two, we're going to have broken even. We're going to have experienced enough benefit, either through cost reduction or increased revenue or reduction of risk, that it will justify spending $100,000. That's number one. Number two is kind of a straight line ROI. So here's money out, here's money in, and we're not going to do any kind of time value of money analysis. We're just going to do straight line. And whether that's a 3-year or 5-year or 10-year analysis showing how much benefit occurs over that period of time. The third is time value of money, or what they call net present value, which is essentially taking into account the cost of capital. So it's, if your organization has a cost of capital of 3 or 4%, those are kind of common numbers. And really what that usually translates to is, big companies especially, they don't cover all they have debt. And so if you have debt, anytime you spend money, you almost have to look at it from the standpoint of debt spending. So you have to reduce the value of future money coming in, because to get those benefits in 2-3 years down the road, you will have to have financed the dollars that you spent to get there. So that's usually only for major projects where you're spending millions of dollars and you're going to get multi-million-dollar benefit. What they want to make sure, or what that analysis is meant to do, is to show that $1 million in the bank today is better than $1 million of benefit 3-4 years down the road. And like I said, that's usually only in very highly intensive capital projects.
Yeah,
there you go.
I think the most common is probably 3 or 5 year kind of approach to it.
I think so. I mean, if you don't need to over-engineer your analysis, don't.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yep. Keep it simple, understand your data, right, and be able to defend it. If you're comfortable with what you're presenting, you're going to have a way easier time to defend numbers, right? And to be able to go in front of wherever you need to get in front of and try to get that. So good stuff. So I think as we start to wrap things up here, we talked about quantified benefits, unquantified or kind of intangible benefits, right? Flexibility, and what else did we talk about? Risk, how to calculate risk, threat, vulnerability, coming up with things to try to address that. What am I missing, Jim?
I think, I don't think we gave anybody an exact formula, but I think one thing that we did was give folks hopefully a framework to look at ROI analysis through, and understanding that, each project's going to have its own set of benefits and costs, and, start off by making a list, and then evaluating that list in terms of what are you going to try to dollarize or quantify, and build your analysis from there.
What can you measure? What can't be measured or measured accurately? Able to put that in front into a context of spend to show the benefit for it. And then also, I think the big one, right? Working with the business, establish those relationships, coordinate with them, and help each other be successful is a big part of it too.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a great career move.
Definitely. I can attest to that for sure. All right. Well, I think that's probably where we'll want to leave it for this week. I'll put a link to the report that we're referencing on this episode into the show notes. And if folks want to, get a hold of us, we're always happy to take questions or ideas for future shows, and they can email us at questions@identityatthecenter.com. And with that, hope everyone stays healthy, and we'll talk to you guys in the next one.
Have a great week, everyone.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. For more episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.